Welcome, everybody. I know we got some first timers here. That's super exciting. And as you can see from the chat, we've been putting in where we're coming from, and we really do cover a lot of the country here, as we often do with our discussions. I'm Molly Zeff. I want to welcome other members of the film discussion team we have here today: Donna Murphy, Ivan, Ron, and Janelle, who I think will probably join us a little later. We also have, as everyone knows, a really special guest we've been super excited to meet, along with his daughter, actually, another star of the show, Chris Buckley. So thanks for coming on, Chris. It's always a huge treat for us. Ray Rangel style, since we're all often on mute on Zoom, we do this to welcome, or to clap, rather. So a big warm welcome. And I'm just going to briefly lay some ground rules, and also, as we do at the beginning of every discussion, and then I'll introduce Chris more formally. And after that, we're going to talk with him first as the film club organizers for about 15 minutes, then take some questions, some limited questions from all of us, the audience, all of you, the audience, and then we'll go into about an hour of our usual back and forth discussion. And Chris, you can listen in, occasionally jump in, and that's about it. So yeah, again, this is Raver Angel's Film Club, and we will be discussing the movie, which hopefully you all watched already, Refuge. But if you haven't had a chance, because I know some of you just found out about this more recently, it is one of the most moving films I've ever seen in my life. So definitely check it out if you haven't seen it yet. And as always, we're here to understand each other, to explain our views. We are not here to convince anyone to change their mind. So keep that in mind as if you get into the territory of debate, that's Chris's job, literally, is to change other people's minds, but that's not our job here today. We will take turns, not interrupt others, listen to everyone, and try to open up space as much as you can for quieter group members. It's awesome when people want to repeatedly chat, but just try to make sure, if you've already chatted 2 or 3 times, to leave some pause, leave some space, so more people's voices get to be heard. During the discussion, if you'd like to speak, just press the raise hand feature. It's in the middle down below. If you can't find it, let us know. And let's see, you're all doing this already, but just keep yourself on mute when you're not talking. It helps with the echoing and stuff. And actually, yeah, that's all I got on the intro. So big warm welcome to Chris. Chris, we are beyond excited to have you here. And it is such a treat. Usually we get, occasionally we'll have filmmakers, but we don't usually have the people in the film coming out to meet us in the flesh as much as one can over Zoom. I'm going to read your bio, which in no way does an ounce of justice to who you are, but it's what we got. Chris Buckley is a native of Cleveland, Ohio, living in Tennessee. He's a combat veteran of the global war on terror in Afghanistan, where he witnessed the death of his comrade. This experience, along with childhood sexual abuse and the general trauma of combat, led him to drugs and eventually to hate groups. Chris became involved with the KKK upon leaving the military in 2013, where he became a number 2 ranking member. But finally in 2017, he left the hate groups and got sober. Today, Chris works to get people out of extremist groups by telling his story with Dr. Kelly, who we all met in the film. And Chris is working as an exit peer specialist. That's a cool title, exit peer specialist, with Parents for Peace, and has spent the last 5 years working on the front lines of hate and extremism. Wow. Okay, quite the bio there. So I will drop that in the chat as well for anyone who wants to look up and review it at any point. And we're actually going to now have our illustrious co-leader, Ron, take us away with the first question today.
Well, how you doing, Chris? This is Ron, and better known as Sugar Bear. I'll start off with the first question to my fellow Buckeye. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, so I call you a Buckeye. Yeah. So the first question is, sometime in a movie, you don't get to tell the complete story that you may have. And if you could give us one thing in your personal story that you don't think was brought out in your journey and story, go ahead and give us a little taste of that. Something that you think you can think of. And if not, you can elaborate on something you did talk about.
I think one of the more, like, the thing that really gets me about the film is, so we spent about 4.5 years filming, which is like ridiculously long for a documentary. And a lot of the story was like cut and pieced together. So you'll see parts of the story where it's like, man, he looks good, he's healthy, he's got weight on him, he's doing good, and then you'll cut right back to a part that's supposed to be sequential, and it's like, man, he looks like he's back on drugs again. Like, and like that's one of the big, like, just like factors that I have with the film, man, is where they had to cut and piece film from like when I first got out and started getting sober into like the middle of the movie. I don't know, man. It just seems like at no point in the movie do I start to realize that, like, hey, this is the person that I want to be kind of remembered for. So I'd say, like, I've been clean since 2017. And this story took place like in 2019. So like we had to go back and we got a lot of footage from like when I was in rehab and on probation that was injected into the film, that you could kind of tell when you watch it, like some of it's like, maybe this doesn't belong here, like, it's a great scene, but like, what is it doing right here, right? And so we had to find a way to get that footage of things that were recorded and videoed and kind of like added into the story to make it more detailed. I think that's probably the biggest part of the film that we don't get to see a lot of, is like that actual transition, right?
Okay. Thank you very much. I mean,
Hey, listen,
yeah. Yeah.
my son's first base coach is he goes by Sugar Bear too, so
So that's good. As long as it brings a smile to your face, right? All right. I think coming up next will be Donna with the next question. Go ahead, Donna.
Sure, and thanks for telling us about that, Chris. It's always interesting to hear stories about what happens behind the scenes when movies are made. There's, what's how they making the sausage, how do they really do it? It ends up being fascinating. So I appreciate that. So my first question to you is, how did your upbringing influence who you were at the time you joined the white supremacist movement?
Oh man, how much time you got, man? So growing up, I grew up on the west side of Cleveland, very segregated, and to this day I still can't tell you why. Like all of my friends in the neighborhood were either white or Hispanic. All of the black kids that I knew, and the what we'll call as others, like Middle Eastern and Asians, lived on the east side of Cleveland for some reason. And like there was a very clear line right there on St. Clair Avenue, right at the Superior Bridge, that like, you knew you were crossing over into the west side from the east side, vice versa. Growing up, man, like all of us were, the discipline was different by our parents, right? Like, so, I mean, when I tell you that, like, when I got in trouble, I got beat, like with an extension cord, a section of garden hose. My dad's throwing wrenches at me. People see the scars on my head and they're like, "Oh, did you get those in combat?" Yeah, with my dad. 12 years old, you wear a 9/16 boxed in wrench to the face, and you'll hold that light still. My dad was very physically present when it come to discipline. Also, a lot of things that I talk about too is my sexual abuse. I was molested by a very close family member of the same sex growing up, and thinking back, like that's the first person I ever remember hating, and it was a security measure for me, because I mean it started when I was like 5 or 6 and it went on until I was like 12 or 13, and I was big enough to kind of fight him off, and also maybe outgrew his preference a little bit. And so going through that, like I had a deep-seated hatred for like homosexuals and anything that even had to do with that kind of lifestyle, because in my mind, the trauma that I had been through kind of led me to believe that all of this is danger, right? This one person did this to me, so everybody like him is doing this to other kids, and I need to protect myself.
Mm.
No, and I, without that being checked for a long time, my dad was, man, he was racist as they come, homophobic, anti-immigrant. He was anti everything, really.
Mm.
And he suffered from a substance abuse problem, which I'm pretty sure I inherited. But you know, like dad would lose his job and he would automatically blame it on the Hispanics and the immigrants that were coming over here stealing his job. And, you know, he would have to bounce from job to job. And the work that he would find was like, it was excruciating for him, you know, like roofer laborers, you know, like packing asphalt shingles. And so like I got to listen to that my whole life. But the one control I had growing up was all the kids in the neighborhood were kind of going through the same stuff. And baseball, we had a house on a corner lot that had been bulldozed when I was like really young, and it grassed up, and we all built a baseball field in that lot. And we would play baseball if it was warm enough from the time the sun came up or we got home from school till our parents were screaming at us on the porches to get back in the house. And that was our escape. So like the control to what my father was telling me versus what I was experiencing was kind of like that neutralizer. I was a part of the Busing Reform and Integration Act in Cleveland in the 90s, where I was sent over to an all-black school, and all black, like there was a handful of kids. I think they picked 150 from one school district, 150 from a different school district, and they swapped them. Now, what I didn't realize at the time was that everything my dad was telling me, these kids' parents were telling them. So when I got to that school, I was automatically an enemy. Like they wanted nothing to do with me. I was the reason that they couldn't get work, that they were living in poverty. Like all the problems of that community were on my shoulders. I was like 8. And so I became the target of bullying and racial bullying before I ever knew what that really was, right? It wasn't a thing to me. I was a kid. And that kind of cemented it. And you know, move on. My dad shows up out of the blue, moves us to Southern Ohio without a word or any notice. So high school time was really normal. It was pretty average. I was, you know, everybody was like me. I was, you know, really athletic. I did good at baseball, did good at track, played football a little bit, didn't like getting hit, so I stopped. But yeah, so I mean, you know, then I joined the military. So I think that the influence in the beginning was, you know, homosexuality was wrong and it was dangerous and I had been harmed. So that set the first initial like anger and hatred that I had in my heart. And then, you know, moving on into the abuse that I would witness, you know, and be a part of with my father. You know, I didn't like anybody that would put their hands on their kids or, you know, didn't like physical abuse. And my grandma was a saving angel, man. Like she got me into church and tried to keep me on the straight and narrow, but you know, I'm a heathen and I always will be. But you know, a lot
Yeah,
of a lot of things that we don't realize that are just one-offs in our developmental phases and our childhood can lead us down a path of internal injury where
wow.
we feel the need
Yeah,
to act.
yeah. Chris, I'm really sorry for some of the things that happened to you. I mean, especially the sexual abuse. I mean, how awful. And we could listen to you all day and answer each question for 30 minutes, but we're going to try and get some other questions in here. So my next question to you is, as you travel around the country talking and getting to know people, what have you learned about why people join white supremacist groups, in addition to the things that you've told us about yourself?
So a lot of the things that I have learned is, and this is like we take, so hold on, figure out how I want to start this. So I decided when I was getting sober and having trouble leaving the movement, why am I so wound up on the ideology? That's because I haven't healed. I took one coping mechanism, which was the substances, away and replaced it with ideology, right? So the ideology became a coping mechanism. right? So one of the things that I've realized and that I've learned is that trauma, whether it be early onset childhood trauma, whether it be post-traumatic incidences, they're driving factors for addiction, right? Like everybody's using to escape something. And the other thing that we see, that I see as a recovered addict in the work that I do, is that ideology is a coping mechanism that affects the same parts of our brain, our amygdala, our nucleus accumbens, our prefrontal cortex, our bilateral cortex, our our reptilian part of our brain are affected by substance use. It's also affected by trauma. That's that flight or flight recognize and say. So what we do is we bond to an ideology that justifies our anger and focuses our trauma responses and kind of like gets us off the hook. That's the payoff. We don't have to associate with it. We go through the same cycle craving, using and crash phase as we do with substance abuse. You'll have a trigger that will remind you of an injustice or an injury or revenge that you need to get. Then you will start to crave that justice and that revenge. You will act on it. You will receive your high. You will go into your come down, and then you will start to be triggered again. This is why the news, the media, social media, the online spaces are so dangerous, is because they're constantly feeding the trigger. It's just as dangerous for somebody who's involved in extremist ideology to be online with that group of people as it is for a heroin addict to be at the dope house, right? Because they're constantly using, and eventually there has to come a reckoning, right? And I like to introduce myself before the reckoning of, I'm going to go shoot up a school. I'm going to go, terrorize a church. I'm going to go commit a hate crime. And I can tell you that our work at Parents for Peace, we have prevented school shootings, we have prevented mass shootings, and we have, done the work behind the scenes that nobody talks about.
Great. Well, Molly, so thank you, Chris. This is incredible wisdom that you have gained, I know, through your personal life history, but also because you've studied the subject and gotten certificates in it too. So Molly, that is a good lead into your question.
Definitely. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you being so open about your personal story too.
Got it. And you can't talk about it unless you've been about it.
For sure. Well, basically, in terms of anyone's work that might ever build upon yours, I mean, I know you're an extremely highly trained individual in this kind of work that you do now, but let's say people were to, want to carry your work into the world in some way. That's where this question is coming from. And also just because of curiosity, what do you believe, after traveling all over the country, what do you believe are the number 1 or 2 strategies one can employ when helping someone to leave behind extremist or just dangerous views? And I put it in the chat as well.
All right. So first off is, I think that the basis of any good intervention or, exit work is going to be the public health approach, right? Find the source of injury, heal the wound, and then the compensation of coping mechanisms are no longer needed, right? So for an example, with me, I hated homosexuals. I hated the LGBTQ movement, everything about it. And then I did some internal work. I did some cognitive therapy, and I really dissected what was hurting and what was injured. And I came to this term that one individual overstepped a very sacred boundary and took advantage of me as a child. That is not every single person, and it's unfair to put that burden onto every other person in that demographic. To this day, my kids' godmothers are a same-sex couple that I went and became ordained so that I could perform the ceremony, right?
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so
Wow.
it's the power of healing, right? When you heal those traumas, you don't need the get backs. You don't need to seek justice and vengeance, right? You go from being Batman to kind of just relaxing and being who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the studies that show how effective a public health approach is. Parents for Peace, we pioneered that. We took substance abuse models from amphetamines and uppers with a non-medicated cognitive, type of approach. And we created a program to do it, man. Like, we're the only ones doing what we do with that space. We have a lot of support in it, a lot of, researchers and, universities that are like, yeah, that's the way to go. The other thing I would keep in mind is without a sober mind, you can't have a sober heart. Okay. A lot of these people are dealing with substance abuse. They're unmedicated, dealing with undiagnosed mental health issues. The amount of mental health crisis that I come in contact with during my day-to-day caseload are through the roof. 75 and 90%. That's a big margin, right? And I'm being generous with the 10% that might not have that, right? So mental health is the second biggest driving factor. We have a lot of undiagnosed autism, ADHD, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder. A lot of these things are driving factors, and when they're untreated, they mask themselves as other situations. So somebody who's like, oh, he's just ADHD, might really be on the high functioning end of the autism spectrum, and vice versa. Somebody might not be autistic, they might just have untreated ADHD, and those lead to depression, anxiety, reactions that as a society we label that, we got to get them medicated, and that's a big issue. You have to stabilize the mind so that you have access to the heart.
I think what you're saying is there's no easy route to this. It's not like you just like have a hour conversation and you're good.
Oh, bro, you're pulling teeth from a gator all day, and it's not fun. It's not easy. It's not glorious work. It is when you talk about it because of the fulfillment you get from helping people leave that cycle. But the work itself is ugly. It's messy. You talk to therapists and social workers and clinicians, and they're going to tell you that there's nothing glamorous about their job except for the reward they get of helping somebody through that dark spot in their life.
Thank you. That was huge. I feel like what you just said could literally be a college class for a semester. We are going to have you summarize the work a little bit with a question from Donna now. Donna, you want to jump in about Parents for Peace?
Yeah, so Chris, please tell us more about Parents for Peace, the organization that you volunteer for. We'd love to hear more about it and what you do for them.
So Parents for Peace was founded by Melvin Bledsoe and his daughter. When their son Carlos went to Yemen and became radicalized after visiting his local mosque. He got into the lifestyle of radical Islam, decided he was going to travel to Yemen, and became even further radicalized. When he came home, he killed a U.S. soldier who was home on leave at a recruiting center and wounded another. And he has like 5 life sentences. Melvin had no idea what had happened, how it all came about so soon. So he decided to found an organization where parents could come together and trade, tactics and techniques on how to deal with this. They bring on Miriam Churchill as their executive director, who is, been there since the organization was founded in 2017. She had a vision through her experience working with sex trafficking and sexual crimes in where was she from? Oh wow, Casablanca. All right, where is Casablanca? There's so much information just rolling around in my head right now. But she brought that knowledge to what she was doing, and she kind of created this helpline, the first ever non-government funded. We don't work for the FBI. We don't call and report people. We do the work. We have a reporting process, but basically we take the call. We do an intake. We do a radical behavior scale. We get a biopsychosocial kind of outline around the individual. Sometimes it'll be the individual themselves that calls. Sometimes it'll be a family member. Sometimes it'll be a loved one or a friend. And we can do this work either directly or indirectly, either directly with the individual concerned or indirectly to build up the network of family support and community support around the individual, and eventually getting the individual to take part and become part of the sessions. Right now, we're working on a caseload of around 78 cases. Since the beginning of the year, we've gotten over 300 cases in our system. Some cases take 2 or 3 months to get lined out, get the person back on track, figure out what the need is, get them stable, and get them back integrated into society. I've got cases that I've worked for 2 years that I'm still working.
Mm.
And then sometimes you have the need to, kind of push this over to a law enforcement standpoint. And one of the biggest things we do, though, is we're peer support, right? We as the peers have been through and have lived experiences the same as the caller or the person of concern, and we take their hand and we drag them through the ugly part of it. We get them back on track. We provide networks and resources in the community, whether it be mental health, low cost, no cost insurance, whether it be housing, whether it be employment, retraining, or vocational education. We take them from where they are and they're angry about to where they can be and want to be.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing stuff. So parentsforpeace.org. We'll put that in the chat. Amazing. So we do want to give other people a chance to ask you questions, but Ivan, you had one or two that you wanted to ask. So I'm handing it over to you. Ivan?
Thanks a lot, Chris.
Yeah.
And hello from Honolulu, Hawaii.
Oh man,
I have a couple of questions.
You
I have
guys
a
doing?
couple of questions about personal relationships. At
Okay.
the time you were trying to rearrange your life and get away from extremist views, extremist organizations, how important were your long-standing personal relationships? Were
Oh,
they a big obstacle? Are they an overlooked area of personal transformation?
so I'm gonna lean back on some of the core things that I learned when I was getting sober. Um, People, places, things, right? You have to change the support structures that enabled you to live the lifestyle you were living. You have to change all the people that weren't a part of you getting better. You have to change all the places you would go. You had to change where you worked. You had to change what you did on a daily day. So the long-standing relationships took a big hit. I'm still working on those. I've reconnected with my mother. We're on speaking terms, and we're slowly rebuilding that relationship, as well as my father. We just started to work on our relationship. And the only relationship that I have to this day that came out of that experience with me is Melissa and these kids. So I mean, everything else is built from scratch, but you surround yourself. There's an old saying: if you surround yourself with 5 billionaires, you'll be the sixth. If you surround yourself with 5 drug addicts, you'll be the sixth. You will become the people that you surround yourself with. And when I got out of that lifestyle, when I stopped surrounding myself with the toxic, like in that group, I started to surround myself with people like Arno and Dr. Kelly, and the people in the network, my probation officers and my substance abuse counselors. And I started to fix my life, man. And here it is. I'm buying a house. I make really good money doing what I do at my job. I get to volunteer and work the best job in the world at Parents for Peace. And it's amazing how much the structure that you build around yourself will reinforce the self that you're living.
Yeah. Hey, I really appreciate you being here. You making this whole experience so much more valuable.
Yeah.
My next question is about personal responsibility. In the film, you say you didn't take advantage of some of the opportunities that were available to you in your earlier life. How important is taking more responsibility for your life in overcoming, extremist beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful answer would be it's the number one and most important thing that I do. But the honest answer is that I'm still learning, right? Accountability is an easy concept for me. Responsibility is a little bit tougher, and accountability is taking responsibility for your actions, whether good or bad. And I like to take responsibility for my good actions. It's just tough for me to stand up and take responsibility when I mess up. But I'm a human being. I'm working towards getting better, and you know, my everyday life. As far as ideology wise, like that stuff's in the past. Like I'm in a really healthy spot in my life, but now I'm kind of learning, like I'm learning how to be a dad. I'm learning how to be a husband, and to set back and have to take accountability when I mess up as a parent or I mess up as a peer or a role model. Like, man, that is a punch in the gut. Like, so I mean, short answer is like it's highly important. Honest answer and the more in depth is that I'm still a work in progress, and I'm making that effort to be better every day.
Thank you.
All
That
right.
was awesome. We're going to take some questions from the audience. We're going to cut out some team questions because it's important to hear it from everybody. Can people just raise their hands again using the raising hand feature at the bottom? Cynthia, you're going to start us off. And we might not get to everyone's questions because we do want to do the usual group discussion as well. But Cynthia, take us away to start us out.
There. As I listen to you talk, Chris, it strikes me, and I wonder if you would agree with this, that you've gone in an arc from one of perhaps feeling like the victim to somebody who's much more proactive now, and that kind of ties in with what you were just talking about, being personally responsible.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you to a point. I'm going to push back on that a little bit.
Yeah.
There is victimhood. People are victims, right? Like you can be a victim of a violent crime. You can be a victim of a robbery. You could be a victim of a hit and run, or, so when we throw this term, this victimhood mentality, it's the number one driving factor of extremism and substance abuse, right? So at some point, the people doing the work have to understand that people are victims of circumstance, of cultural, inadequacies, of trauma. And when we can acknowledge that hurt and say, hey, look, man, it's not cool what happened to you. I'm sorry that happened. How do we make it better? Well, then you're no longer a victim. And at some point, even as a victim, you're going to come to this arc of where you're like, I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I'm going to be a survivor. And sometimes that takes the nurturement of people around you who want to do this work to say it's okay to be a victim for a little bit, right? Process it, let's deal with it, and let's move on from it. Now, the problem that we run into is when people decide that they're just going to set in victimhood. They're not going to go any further, and that's also a trauma response. So that's why I think that mental health professionals and people that are, maybe life coaches, mentors, are very important in this field. Clinicians, therapists, like we got to get everybody on board at this table, because we're going to come to a point where we're at an impasse and we can't motivate that person forward. So we need the help of everybody and the well-rounded machine to come together and make this possible. Do I call on somebody?
Sorry, I forgot. No, my bad. Linda Pluck, go for it.
Okay,
Yeah,
I was going to jump in.
yeah, Chris. Yeah, I'm just so impressed by your honesty, as much as your openness and insight. It's very clear you have learned much more than any of us, I think, or many people who've undergone what you've undergone would have gained. So very much impressed by your story and how well you articulate it. I think I heard, I think his name is, I think his first name was Cristo Picciolini. He's a former white neo-Nazi and left. And he said what being a member of those groups did for him was it gave him an identity, a sense of belonging and purpose, which he had not felt in his family. And he was bullied as well. And when he was recruited, all of a sudden he had an identity. I'm one of you. I belong. I have someone I belong with, and I have a purpose now. I know what I'm going to do. And I thought to myself, I hear that same characteristics to identify gang members in our inner cities, the same drivers for young Black kids and Hispanic kids, poor kids anywhere. And I wondered whether there has been any effort between former white supremacists and former gang members, because I know there are many former gang members who are doing the same work in their communities that you are doing with the white supremacists. I wonder if there's ever been any of coming together of recognizing that you're both, you're both dealing with the same problem in a different setting.
So I'll put it like this. You know, a wise woman once told me, if I don't have anything nice to say, not to say nothing at all.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say anything about that individual. That individual, I don't recognize the work that he does. It's strictly for profit. Okay.
Oh.
Really heart-throbbing story that every former you're ever going to meet is going to give you the same heart-throb story. I'll leave that there. There's a reason that the organizations out there, like Life After Hate, Parents for Peace, Jeff Shope's Beyond Barriers, don't work with him. Okay? I'm glad you took something away from his story. There was a plus in your encounter with him. Moving on, I think it would be great to get inner city gang members and reform gang members together and kind of recreate the sustainability of the model. I think could do wonders in any aspect of where you're working it. Whether it be inner city gangs, whether it be rural white supremacy groups, whether it be, you know, former veterans, motorcycle club, like all of these groups can come together and kind of find a little bit of commonality. One of the hard thing, and probably the hardest thing I ever had to do, was there is a person that I directly work with, Anton Lucky. He is a Reformed Blood gang member out of Houston, Texas. And we met through an individual named Leon Ford. They call him Mr. Pittsburgh. He was shot and paralyzed by the police a few years back. And he was like, Brother Chris, you got to come and speak at this event that I'm having. It's going to be great. He's got a real soft voice. I love him. And Leon is definitely like a brother to me. So I get there. It's in Pittsburgh, right? We're having a great time. And I realized, like, this is a Black Lives Matter event. And here I am as a former leader of the KKK who's going to give opening remarks and a panel discussion at a BLM event. Hardest, scariest thing I ever had to do in my life. Wasn't injured. Come out of there with a lot of new friends. And, you know, I faced a hysteria fear that, you know, that I still do a lot of work with Anton and Gary and you know, Candace Fleming over there at their organization. So dude, I love the idea and I'd be open to it in any sense.
Well, it sounds like some of that's going on already, you know, maybe in a less formal way, but that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
How about Amir? How about you go next, Amir?
Thanks. Hey, Chris. I love that you've taken all this. It seems like you have tremendous energy, and you've taken it from pouring it into, you know, more hurtful things to very helpful things. And I guess in particular, I was intrigued by some of your comment earlier about, you know, how you've identified and potentially prevented some, you know, mass shootings, school shootings, that sort of thing. And you know, I've been thinking about this a lot with, you know, what's going on across the country and indeed about like how many of these potential cases we don't hear about, you know, where maybe somebody intervenes and is able to be sort of a moderating influence on would-be perpetrators of violence. And I guess it just sort of got me thinking too, like how did you, it would be interesting to hear, first of all, maybe about one, you know, if you have an example of how that sort of plays out, but also how do you find out about those cases? And do you think, like, I'm just curious, like a lot of these things must happen sort of behind the scenes. And I'm wondering, you know, how much do you sort of, this Parents for Peace or you kind of go out and sort of proactively identify potential trouble spots, or is it more like people who are already reaching out, you know, in some way because, you know, somebody realizes that someone needs help? Wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so most encounters we have are encounters that we have gathered through the helpline. Family members have called. We've kind of walked them through the process of the support network, like I spoke to earlier. Give you a quick example. Last year, well, it was early the beginning of this year, because it was after New Year's. So individual called the helpline, was concerned about his son. His son had kind of abandoned his traditional, you know, his cultural upbringing. It was a Black family. It was an adopted son who was white. He started to embrace Islam, and he got sucked into like the extremist Islamism. He would come in, and there was several times where he would speak ill of Dr. King, in an attempt to elicit a response from the adopted parents. We started to find out that there were some substance abuse and some drinking going on, and the mom was cleaning the room one day and went to clean under his bed and noticed a magazine sticking out from under his mattress. Now, when I say magazine, I'm not talking about a People magazine. I'm talking about an ammo magazine for an AR-15. She raised the bed up. There was over 600 rounds under the bed, and probably 7 other magazines loaded, 3 rifles and 4 handguns, with about 300 rounds of ammo for the handguns. That day, the dad called the brother. The brother came. We immediately notified the FBI, got everything situated, and we prevented a situation from happening. They found plans later on where he had been surveilling a local mall that he was gonna take care of. His manifesto had been written. This individual was a juvenile, so it's being handled. I mean, when I say juvenile, like severely juvenile, like 14. And you know, that's about as far confidentiality wise as I can go. But this individual was taken into custody and is now receiving the appropriate mental health services that he needs to get himself back on track. So,
All right, thank you. Up next is it Bevrin? How you pronounce your name?
Oh, Barevin, but you can call me.
Bevrin. Yeah, no, is that Turkish? Is that Turkish?
It's actually
name?
Kurdish.
Okay, Curtis. Okay,
Yes.
go for it.
So my question to Chris was, this is a little bit tangential, but I was curious, given your involvement with the Parents for Peace, I believe it was called. I'm in the education space, so just to give you some context, I was curious to hear your thoughts on including more or this controversy in regards to talks about like race and diversity within the school system, and given your experience, what role do you think such conversations should have in the school setting?
ah, man, you really hit me with one, huh?
I know, I was like, oh God, he's gonna be like, that's a tough one.
The conversations need to be had with individuals around their situations. All right, this forced inclusion, this forced kind of acceptance is actually forcing the problem to become more of an issue, right? I think there's certain conversations that need to be had at certain age groups, right? I think that parents need to be a lot more involved in what's going on with their kids at school, whether that be their kids are bullying other kids, their kids are exhibiting certain behaviors at school. But I also think that they need to be a little bit more involved in the problem resolve phase, right? I'm not an educator, but I'll tell you that, man, there's a right and a wrong way to do things. I don't know what the right way is, but this seems like it's getting into a lot tougher of a situation than what it needs to be. It's become politicized, right? We are politicizing a problem for politicians' gain, right? None of us on this screen are politicians, but we all support them because they say, look what I'm doing. I'm forcing this issue on parents. You've got the situation in Virginia where You know, we're all aware of what's going on with the school system in Virginia. We've got this CRT curriculum, the equity and inclusion diversity training, right? When you teach people that they're different and they're the problem and that other people are the victims, we go right back to what we talked about earlier, getting out of the victimhood mentality, right? We have to do that. But when you teach young children that they're a victim and that's the people that oppress them, or vice versa, right? I don't know what the appropriate answer to that is. And I know that you guys look to people that are doing this work as like, you should have that answer. And you're right, I should, but I don't want to speak in a place that's going to cause more harm. Because at the end of the day, my response needs to be one that's going to do no harm, right? But I know that when we try the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again with expecting a different result. I don't know that it's not a place for this conversation, but I do know that the places that we're trying to have it and that we're trying to force it on, there's a different way to do this. You catch more flies with sugar than poop, right?
Yeah.
Hey, listen. So one of the things I like to point out is this, okay? I come from a very red rural area. I'm sure a lot of you guys are in very highly populated, densely blue areas, right? Politics here doesn't mean anything. I don't care if you're red, blue, purple, green, what you vote for. Your voting time in the booth is your time, nobody else's, for your voice to be heard. All right. But what we've started to do is we've started to attack people on their fundamental beliefs because they don't align with ours. Those belief systems are cultural and geographical, right? You look at the inner cities, those people have a different set of needs, values, and morals than people that aren't in city environments, that are in the rural environments. That's why you look at the map, half of it's red with big blue dots everywhere, right? Like if you look at a political layout landscape, like there's just as many blue as there is red. They're just packed tighter together. So it looks like, so I mean, my thing is stop trying to make a point on your politics and say, what's the best course of action in this situation? How do I get the best results with the least amount of harm? And I think that we'll get on a better track. But as long as we got politicians in Washington trying to get votes based on a parent's and a child's suffering across this country, we're never going to get anywhere. It's profit.
Thank you, Chris. You hit on something that Brave Angels is adamant about, trying to give perspectives, and I really applaud you for your perspective because you know it resonates. So thank you very much on that. And Laura, how about you? They'll be the last one, and then I guess we'll start up with questions from the movie or the documentary. Go ahead, Laura. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Chris, I was really so interested in everything you said about, your personal experiences, trauma, addiction, how all those things created the, person that you were a few years ago. I know a lot about addiction and recovery and trauma and all that. So, that was just so interesting and meaningful. And this question might be one of those that's like, well, I'm asking you like to explain a huge thing. And if so, then don't worry about it. But, when you were talking about, well, okay, I did this in therapy and that changed me in this way and this. I just can't quite imagine how people in extremist groups are first of all would be in therapy in the first place, and also would become willing to, to be vulnerable enough to do that kind of work. Like, how do you get from being in an extremist group to being in the place where, and I'm not saying everyone has to go through therapy to do that, but just the way what you talked about is like, I couldn't quite put that together with my idea of what it's, being that armored and defended of being in an extremist group to get to that place that you did. And like I said, you then would have to explain the whole Parents for Peace program. That's okay. You don't have to do that, but that was kind of what
there's a really answer for this. Okay. So you're experienced in substance abuse and you remember the armor that you would put on every day when you would use that substance and you would get high so that you didn't have to feel, or that you could feel something, right? That was your armor. So the ideology is also the armor. You put that ideology on and you respond with this radio style canned speech response to anything you don't agree with. Oh, it's the Jews, or it's Marxist, or and now, you know, you have like Antifa, who are like the anti-fascist fascist, right? And it's like, you know, this is how we're gonna reply to this. Everything is I'm anti this, anti. So it becomes a coping mechanism in its sense, right? And just like people don't get involved in their journey to recovery immediately, like, yep, I'm gonna get clean, I'm gonna get sober, let's get into treatment, like it's a battle. But the most important thing you have to do is you have to build an authentic, real, sincere foundation for a relationship, right? If me and you are just talking and like, you don't know me from Adam, and I'm like, hey, look, man, the way you're thinking about this is all wrong. Let me tell you a little bit about what helped me. You're just gonna be like, dude, screw you, man. Like, you don't know me. You know, tell me about my life, right? But you listen. You give a microphone to the pain. You absorb that. You take that in, and you don't listen to respond. You listen to understand, right? And once you can understand the problem, you can start to build that trust. That person's gonna be like, wow, they didn't judge me. Like, they just let me talk about that. And that was some dark stuff that I talked about. And then you can possibly identify with it, as you do with other addicts, I'm sure. You can be like, hey, I know what you're going through. Let me tell you a story about when I was in the trenches, right? And that's how you build this relationship. You do the same thing with the substance abuse world that I'm involved in with you. We're right there together. We're recovered addicts. Heck yeah, man. And then you do the same thing with the recovery from ideology. The cool thing about ideology is you don't have to get the person sober to resolve the ideology. With substances, you have to physically get the person weaned off of the substance that they need to survive, right? Alcohol and benzos will kill you if you come off of them, right? With ideology, you just have to learn that maybe we're wrong. And in order to be able to show somebody the path of being right and wrong, you have to have some trust. And then there's that little thing of like, nobody's going to get out until they're ready. You have to help them get ready.
Chris, I hope everybody give a hand for that, because the key ingredient I heard on there is that relationship, and give microphone to the noise, I guess is what you were saying, the microphone to the pain. And I hear that loud. And before anyone can believe the truth, they have to have that relationship. And that's totally key. That is totally key.
And I think that one thing that's really important in my recovery was the ability to hold multiple truths, right? So often we get into a conversation with each other and it's our job to change their mind, or their job to change their mind. And once you get into that kind of conversation, you've already lost.
Right.
But
I totally agree with you, because we're not taught how to listen with our minds. So we're taught to listen with our ears, and a lot of times it's plugged up. So thank you, Chris. I think we're going to now the question, and the first question will be by Molly about the documentary. So go for it, Molly.
Yeah, so this is a question for the group in general, and we'll probably just take one or two answers to each of these. I want to just jump to one first about stereotypes. Do you being all of us, do you see the film, for anyone who's seen it, obviously that is, as changing stereotypes that might be held by either the audience, like us, or the participants in the film? So, you know, thinking back to all kinds of people in the film and the stereotypes that were addressed. I'm going to put this in the chat. Do you feel like the film did a good job of addressing stereotypes that you perhaps held, or, you know, that you had in mind before watching it, and or stereotypes of audiences that it might be reaching?
Man,
sorry, Chris, this is for the general audience.
Oh, I thought you were asking.
No, I know you had stereotypes under mine, which is great. We're getting to, so this is like usually we do a full hour and a half of just like audience discussion. And because you're here with a just a lot of rich wisdom and excitement and answers. We featured you for a lot of it. But yeah, we're gonna open this up. Dinesh, I don't know how to pronounce your name. How do you say it?
Yeah,
And go-
Dinesh.
Dinesh. Okay, great.
Well, I had a stereotype that Ku Klux Klan members, they never change, or they never don't become like Chris has become. So yeah, that was my stereotype.
Thank you. And Lori and Kevin, go for it.
Yeah, at the beginning, watching, especially Chris at the very beginning of this, I was like wanting nothing to do with you, Chris. I was like, like this guy's scary. And if this guy, I'm Jewish, I'm like, this guy knew me, he would want to kill me. He would want to just do away with me. And like, I really felt that energy from that, and then watching the progress and watching the, I don't remember his name, the Muslim doctor guy, working with you, sort of slowly and like, what are you doing today? And, yeah, I have my nieces and, this is what we do together, and how you got to watch your heart open up and accept somebody who, who his race, not his race, but his religion, these people killed your buddy in war and all of that. I was just really noticing my own negative, stereotypes, obviously, and trying to open my heart to accept and change and see how people do change. So it was ended up being a really beautiful thing. So thank you.
Awesome. Oh man, we gotta welcome Chris's wife. We heard you're one of the real stars of the show here.
Say hi.
Thanks for everything you've done too. Yeah. Let's see, Linda and then Mary, and then we'll probably move on to the next question.
Yes, I live in a heavily blue area, Massachusetts, right around Boston, and our Braver Angels group is always struggling to get red members. But even without many actual red members, my mind has been opened a great deal just by some of the books we've read. And I have to say, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, because I have friends in the South and I know there are many great people there, but I do have a bias. It's it was just really great for me to see that town of, was it Clarkston, Georgia, where they have welcomed refugees from, I don't know how many countries. I don't know of a town in Massachusetts that could equal that. So that was a really good mind-opening impression for me in the movie. So I'm glad I saw it. And I've been telling my friends all about it as well.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you. Mary Beth, take us home on this question, then we'll move on to a question from Donna. Go for it, Mary Beth.
You're muted, Mary.
Gotta undo that mute button. There you go.
Just I think the original question was about stereotyping and sort of things that you didn't expect or whatever. And for me, it was when Himal, I think was his name, showed up with the big, beautiful, shiny black car and the gifts for your kids, Chris, and into this poor rural area that like he just stuck out like a sore thumb. And it wasn't just because he was a Kurdish refugee. It was also because he just ripped well speaking. And for me, that sort of opened my eyes to, oh, now I understand why there are large swaths of white people who are complaining about, not that they're right, but that they're complaining about how refugees and everybody have it better than them and blah, blah, blah. Like, I began to understand how they could possibly think that, where before I was like, how could you even think that? But just seeing that juxtaposition of him and his shiny, beautiful car, where he stuck out like sore thumb, really kind of opened my eyes to where some of that anger is coming from, I think. So That's all.
Build on that. Me and Haval, we do a lot of talks, and we'll travel the country, and we talk about our relationship. And Haval has a story that he tells that I can't tell, right? But he's like, when I pulled up to Chris's house and I've seen what he was living in, and I've seen where he lived and the state of his community. And I said to him, like, this is really where you live. He said, I've lived in refugee camps since I was a teenager. And this is worse than any camp I've ever lived in. So when Haval tells that story, people are like, oh. And Haval will tell you, he'll be the first one to tell you, he'll be like, I see why people are angry. They see all these things being what they perceive as handed to immigrants and refugees, and they don't have to see the work that we have to go through to get it. They just see the end results and they feel forgotten about. And now Haval is like on this big, like, rural America is America's refugee camp, right? Like, we're American refugees in rural America. And I see it, the drug epidemic, the just destroyed. And I know you guys see it in your big cities, right? And it's awful. Like, that epidemic doesn't have, we're a refugee camp without borders is what he says. There's no borders. So I think that's a really powerful message that he sends out when he does his talk. I can't have that conversation, right? Because when you have a white guy from rural America talking about we're rural American refugees, people are like, get out of here, dude. You guys got it way better than you think. But when you have an actual refugee who's and he's like, hey, it's bad. It's really, really bad, guys. They're like, oh, well, how bad is it? And he has that platform. So thank you for pointing that out.
All right.
Donna, this leads perfectly into your question.
Actually, it already answered my question, so I'm going to skip to the next one. That was wonderful. What I want to ask is hate caused by fear? And if so, what are some of the best ways to lessen fear? And this one is going out to everybody who's on this call. So is hate caused by fear, and how do you lessen fear? And Lenny, you're up.
Yeah, I think hate can sometimes be caused by fear. I mean, Chris described, what he went through as a child. Absolutely, that would cause hatred. That's why he hated homosexuals. But I think that the scenario that Chris just described recently in the movie, I think, is more pertinent. It wasn't fear that caused hate. It was just this misunderstanding and not knowing the other person. Because that was the one scene in the movie that got me more than anything. When Haval goes to that place in where Chris was living, and he said, I think he called this is the forgotten America, and this is why people are angry, and they look to their political leaders and perhaps quite often blame them, and they think that if I vote for this particular guy for president, it's going to change everything because he's so different. And I actually found information that said a lot of the people who voted for Donald Trump for that reason also voted for Barack Obama, because they looked at those two guys as being different out of the mainstream, and that by electing them, they were going to change everything and make their lives better. And of course, it never works out that way. There's deeply ingrained problems when you have issues with addiction and perhaps lack of education or whatever. But the addiction plague, striking this nation, I think, was devastating. It really was, and I think that was a big part of the problem. So I think that caused a lot of the hate. So well done, Chris. It was very well stated in the movie.
Great answer, Lenny. Thank you very much. And I do want to give Lenny a pat on the back. He is actually a politician in Massachusetts, and he's a huge supporter of Braver Angels. So thank you, Lenny, for the work that you do. Now, Barbara, you're up.
Yes, I was just going to say that I definitely think that hate is often caused by fear, but that's kind of like what we say in Braver Angels. If you hear from the other person and realize and understand more where they're coming from, it's like fear of the unknown. And you've been told by, because we all tend to be in our groups or tribes or whatever, and people that are like us that think like us. And so then someone who's different in some way, and then we don't know, then we just are afraid of the unknown. And so then that causes us to want to avoid them or to think they're trying to harm us. And unfortunately, I was going to say something about politicians, but you just said the gentleman that spoke a moment ago is a politician. But I do think, unfortunately, that's how they appeal to voters. It's easier to get people to vote against someone because they're afraid than it is to have people really understand the issues and really know there are solutions and there are problems if we work together, you know. And so I think a lot of that is the problem right now, in that everything on the other side, okay, they're trying to take, you know, both the red and the blue, they think they're trying to destroy the country, you know, and so nobody wants the country to be destroyed, but, you know, you don't know, so you're all afraid. Okay, well, I can't let that person get in power because they're going to destroy it. Now, I had one question I just wanted, it's been bothering me since I saw the movie, because also it was a magazine that comes periodically to our house from this group called the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they publish what they call hate groups. And I was curious, I went to their hate map that is online, and there's one, there's my county, you know, and this, what's a hate group? That's kind of my thing. Who decides what a hate group is? And so there's one organization in my county that was listed, it's called Moms for Liberty. And so Moms for Liberty, I mean, who gets to decide something's a hate group? I mean, obviously what Chris was in, the KKK, we all know that, right? But what about all these other things where people start pointing fingers and saying, that's a hate group, that's a hate group? What gives you the right to say something's a hate group?
I guess that's a question to you, Chris.
Yeah, so you know, your guess is as good as mine. I guess it's whoever has the microphone that gets to point the finger at people saying something they don't like, right? And what we have to remember in this country is that we have freedom of speech, and we could say things that might be hurtful or disagreed upon by other people, but that doesn't mean it's hate speech. Okay? I do believe that there should be consequences for your words. Every adult should take accountability for the words of their tongue and what they influence and cause, which is why it's such a great gift that we've been given, is the freedom of speech, right? With that being said, I think that, you know, what I was getting to before is who has the microphone? Who gets to say, oh, that's hate speech, that's a hate group, that's transphobic, that's homophobic, that's white supremacy, that's racism, that's anti this, that's anti that. And it's like, really, it's just sometimes people don't agree with your views and values, and that's where we go back to multiple truths, right? And two truths can be held at the same time and both be just as valid. But I want my truth to be the more popular one. So when you don't agree with me, I'm going to label you, and I'm going to cancel you, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And I think that there's a real problem with that nowadays. The tolerance level has went to nothing. Like, there's zero tolerance for any kind of adverse or pushback with conversation and dialogue. As soon as somebody says something you don't agree with, you want to shut them down and cancel them rather than listen to understand. You listen to respond.
Great Braver Angels type answer, Chris, because we're all about getting reds and blues, giving them opportunities to listen to each other without trying to change minds. So thank you. We'll take one more answer. Robin Perry, go ahead.
Thanks. This is my first Braver Angels event, so just gonna slide in at the end. Really enjoyed the movie. Thank you, Chris. Everything that everybody said, I just applaud. I wanted to follow up on a question that was in the chat earlier about this issue of fear and how we lessen fear, and just ask a complementary question, which is creating an environment where great things can happen. Wonder if you would be willing to speak a little bit more about what are one or two things that we can do to create an environment where we can begin to, as you suggested, develop trust, listen. You know, you mentioned listen. So I'm just curious, one or two things about creating an environment, something really practical that you do or that we can do. Thank you.
Then the first thing I try to do is find out how I identify with the other person. What are the things that make us similar? What makes us alike? What can we bond over? Once we bond, it's hard to hate something you know. Right? And when you can have a conversation with somebody and be like, you know, I never thought about it from that perspective. Let me take time before I formulate my response and opinion and think about this for a little while. And I think that I'm automatically drawn back to a scene from A Bug's Life. Okay, the Disney Pixar film A Bug's Life about all the ants, and they were by grasshoppers, and they were trying to figure out how to get the grasshoppers from taking all their seeds. And the grasshopper went back and you know, his name was Hopper, and he talked to all the other grasshoppers, and it was like, what? They're just some ants. And he was like, when those ants realize that they outnumber us 100,000 to 1, the way we do things in this country is over. The way we live, our way of life ceases. And what we need to do is realize that we're all ants in the same colony.
Mm-hmm.
And these grasshoppers that are our big media channels and our online spaces are just trying to keep us fighting with ourselves so that we can't realize just how unified and one we are. And when we realize that, and we start to open these spaces where it's like, all right, listen, the conversation about transsexuals, that's a really hard conversation to have.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not have that conversation. Let's talk about what we do agree about, and let's deal with that. And we'll deal with that once we get to a place where we can have that conversation. Right now, it's not a healthy conversation for us to have. So let's move on to something that's a little easier. Like everybody's like, oh, that's just low-hanging fruit. Fruit is still nutritious. Okay? When you're hungry,
beautiful. Mm-hmm. Choosing one thing or at least being open enough to find something that you and I can share and then build from there. Thank you. Beautiful.
Of my enemy is my friend. And our enemy in this country is division and ourselves against each other. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That is the enemy, the common enemy. So when we have the same enemy, right, we can say that because of that, we are friends. And we can deal with the harder things as they come. But right now, we have a duty to each other to stand up and embody the American spirit and come together as a nation and hope that it's not too late.
Wow.
I have hope. Great.
Again, incredible wisdom, Chris. I'm just always I'm overjoyed at the things that I'm hearing. And now I'm going to hand it over to Ron for the next question.
Okay. That last statement that Chris said, it sounded like Lincoln in 1861. You know what I mean? If you think about it, guys, you reflect.
Sure. Lincoln was 6'4", I'm 5'8", dude. Like, nope.
So anyway, Robin also give you a little tidbit about Braver Angels. Not only bond, but a bond by acknowledging what the person you're in a conversation with. And that's part of that, what we call lap skills, you know. And so if you acknowledge what they're saying and then ask permission maybe for give your perspective, then you have a tendency to get together and have a super conversation. So that's, but I like everything that Chris gave. So the next question is about how does, in the documentary Refuge, how did it address concerns about, sometimes you hear the rhetoric about national security and potential risks associated with refugee resettlement, for example, around the concerns that the candidate in the documentary said, Michael Williams, he highlighted. Do you think the documentary addressed that, or is that just a little tidbit? You know, anyone that want to talk about that, because that comes up in today's society as well, about national security and that type of stuff. So anyway, I'm hearing crickets. Oh, there we go. Mary, how about you, Mary? Unmute yourself.
I've heard that over and over. Oh, we don't know who these people are coming in. And I was struck by how Haval said that they were vetted and vetted and vetted and vetted. And there were very few, like it was winning the lottery to be able to even get into the United States, which to me paints a very different picture than God only knows who's coming in here. And then the other piece of it was that when they arrived, they were just sort of dropped. And to me, if you bring someone in cold and just drop them, that's just going to create all kinds of problems. I mean, my husband is Puerto Rican, and his son came and lived with us for his last 2 years of high school recently. And he had the support of our family and extended family that live in this area. And still, it was kind of traumatic for him, even though he already speaks English. And so there's two things. One, they're being vetted and vetted and vetted. And two, okay, you're worried about how they're going to behave when they get here. Why is it that we have refugees coming in and there's no like recognition that they might need some help kind of easing into living here? So those are my two thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I saw Dorsey, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something, Dorsey? You unmute yourself, Dorsey. There you go. Yeah.
I'm not sure I understood your question correctly.
Okay.
Thinking that you had asked something about what that scene in the documentary, what might have been the purpose of it.
Yeah, the scene. Yeah, we talked about that. We have, pre-meetings, and we talked about that. It was the Michael Williams.
Well, let me, I have some thoughts.
Go ahead.
Before, just in case, I don't want you to say what I'm going to say, because you might.
You know me, Dorsey.
I know you, my red friend, indeed. Anyway, what struck me were two things. Is it Havel? Havel was struck by how the townspeople were reacting to the politician. That they weren't allowing him to speak. That the way they were protesting came across as defensive and closed. And so it seemed to me like he got a sense of that's not useful. That's not going to help anything in this situation. And two, it seemed to trigger his thinking or play a part in triggering his thinking that why is it that these people want us to leave? Why is it that they hate us? Let me seek to understand. I think of Monica with her curiosity. I really saw it in him. I want to find out what, I'm curious. He was curious. He got curious instead of defensive.
Okay. Thank you, Doris. Okay. Unless there's someone else that wants to chime on that question, I'll move to the next one. And the next one, how does the refuge highlight the humanitarian aspect of refugee resettlement and advocate for the protection of human rights? Man, that's a mouthful right there. But did anyone see that? Or I don't know if Chris wants to comment on that one.
I think one of the things that highlights on is the needs of the refugee community when they are resettled.
Okay.
Listen to Haval's wife speak about, like, I'd never seen running water. Like, I've never come out of a faucet. They get here and they're given 3 months to be self-sufficient. and how they were able to survive by the graces of the local church, the Christian church in their neighborhood, who embraced them and helped them get established and help them with the needs and how to use the systems here in America and how everything worked and help them get. You also see the lady in the film who works in the refugee community, who helps them to get their social security cards, get their IDs, get their paperwork, get a job, get in school and enrolled, learn the English language. Mama Amina is literally the Mother Teresa of Clarkston. Like, she has taken that task upon her 96-year-old shoulders, and she is literally making sure that people are taken care of in that community. And it's community led, right? It's
Yeah, yeah, Mama Mia, I forgot about her. That's pretty cool because every community, at least where I'm from, have a mama or a papa. You know what I mean? It does things like that. So that's what else did you want to say, Chris? Anything else?
part of the question.
Yeah.
I got the humanitarian needs.
Yeah.
What was the second part of that question?
Oh, the second part of it was man, I can't see it. Oh, human rights, advocate for human rights. Yeah, that's the protection of human rights. That's what the second question is.
Yes, I think that, when refugees come to this country, they come from places where they don't have the rights that we have.
Yeah.
Have the right to free speech. They don't have the right to carry a firearm. They don't have the right to vote. They don't have the right to unlawful search and seizure. They don't have the right to due process under the law. So those human rights, just because they're refugees, doesn't mean that doesn't apply to them. So there needs to be a civics education to teach them what their rights are, how to use them, how to take care of the rights that they have inherited when they become a U.S. citizen.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah.
To the last question, about refugees and the threat of refugees versus immigration.
Yeah.
I think that it's something we can all agree on, that our immigration system is broken.
Mm-hmm.
It's very broken, and we're starting to see more and more undocumenteds committing heinous crimes.
Yeah.
Well, as you guys are getting ready to screen The Sound of Freedom, so I mean, I'm not going to dig too far into that. I think a lot of your questions about illegal immigration and the process versus legal immigration and refugee status is into question there. And I think that film, when you watch it, is going to answer a lot of those questions about why it's important to have an effective system in place and overhaul our immigration system to be more inclusive and for the people coming.
Yeah, if we can get them in the same room and stop all the rhetoric, just get down and solve the problem, that would be excellent. But until we build those relationships, boy, it's going to be difficult. But I think it's achievable. Do I go one more question or move on? I'm asking the bosses here. Okay, sorry, Wendy. Maybe we can follow up with you next time. Okay. We're going to move on. And pardon me?
I was gonna say, Wendy can feel free to put your comment or question in the chat too if she wants.
Yeah, put your question in the chat and one of us will address it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy.
Final,
Ivan.
Yeah, exactly. Final question.
Yeah, Ivan is up. No,
yeah.
Ivan is up next. Go for it, Ivan.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, this might close us out, but my question is to all of us as watchers of the movie. Did the film make you optimistic or pessimistic with respect to the power of conversation to bridge divides? Did you feel optimistic because you saw a stunning example of how conversation could bridge such a wide divide? Or did you end up feeling pessimistic because, boy, these were extraordinary individuals in the film? Cynthia, how about starting us off?
I think I could say both and. Partly because I deeply believe that it's experience that brings us to new understandings. And, that's that's what gets away, deals with the fear that we have. You know, we have an experience with someone and we learn that we don't have to be afraid of that. We don't have to defend against it, etc. And if two people from pretty different backgrounds and experiences were able to bridge the gap between them as Chris and Havel did, then why should we not have lots of hope? And at the same time, acknowledge that it was a lot of work and effort went into accomplishing that.
Right. Yeah. Good answer. Dorsey.
I was a bother also in that watching Chris and Havel, this the beauty, the humanness of what occurred, and then seeing them going around the country, speaking to so many others and creating organization, etc. And at the same time, thinking the need is so tremendous. We need a jillion people out there doing that, it seems like. So I experienced both a hopefulness and a pessimism.
Funny thing about pessimism, we are negative biased creatures by habit. So we focus on the negative and oftentimes overlook the positive in our lives. We overlook what we have and the brightness of what we can do, and we focus on what's wrong. So, you know, while pessimism is okay, it's often focused on more than optimism.
Very good, very good. Molly, I'll leave it to you. Do you want to take
you have
question?
one more, of course, Anna.
Response, or... Yeah.
You had an owner's iPad.
Just say we don't really have time for more questions, but something that I'll move to the chat is the question of if people want to do further reading or watching. I think I just froze for a second. If people want to do further reading or listening or watching on this topic, I'm going to throw up some resources and people can feel free to throw up other resources, by which I mean if there's other stories you want to read about or share or videos you want to watch. The next question was going to be about just kind of common threads you've seen. And I think Chris actually hit on a lot of those, like showing a real love of listening and learning is the common thread that I've seen among very similar stories. So I'll leave us with the desire to go find someone very different and listen, which is basically preaching to the choir because we're all been braver angels. But I'm going to actually say a huge thank you and pass on to Donna to mention the next film, actually.
Okay, well, I'm going to say that I ask you to join us for our next film, which is going to be Sound of Freedom. We'll talk about that on September 27th. Sound of Freedom is a dramatized account of the real life story of Tim Ballard, a former DHS agent who has rescued children from human trafficking. It has become the sleeper hit of the summer. So we'll talk about child trafficking. We'll talk about the movie. And the other thing we'll talk about is how this movie has become entangled in the culture wars. That seems like an appropriate topic for Braver Angels members to talk about as well. And Molly, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Great. Let's give one more big BA style round of applause to Chris. Chris, I can't even imagine your laugh. You put yourself out there again and again and again every day. Not just in front of groups like ours, but in front of an unbearably large and, to me, very intimidating number of people who have an ideology that is just, to me personally, I'll speak very personally, is scary and even and horrifying. And you change people's ideology through your own heart. You have a lot of love. You have a deep-seated wisdom that I observed again and again. And I hope that you continue to travel and touch more lives. I hope to bring you, like I said, to my own synagogue in Boston. Gonna put out there, Chris does travel, so bring him to your synagogue, your mosque, your atheist club, atheist group. Those do exist. That's a real thing. You know, whatever it is, whatever group you're part of, please bring Chris to speak, because obviously this is a story that needs as many audiences as possible. And yeah, final plug, Braver Angels has events all the time. If you're new here tonight, we held these phenomenal debates a lot. They sustained me during their pandemic for many months. And there are also dozens of local alliances. You can like see people in person, not just two-dimensionally like now. There are also other events like book clubs and very serious kinds of discussions. You can see this all on our events page. You can also join Braver Angels. You can become a member for $1 a month. That's kind of crazy. If you want to donate more, Braver Angels definitely is in need of more funding right now as well, but you can join for just $12 a year. And I just want to say, yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Super excited to see many of y'all again. Oh yeah, the music team. We also have phenomenal songs that have come out of BA, like amazing. Some of my favorite songs have been by BA musicians. So definitely, if you want to know some of those, you know, you can check out the Braver Angels YouTube videos on that. I just want to mention one thing that Chris said earlier. He did leave his phone number. Chris, I don't want people to get flooded with calls, but I happen to know as a millennial that a lot of younger people, for some reason I can't understand, are very scared of calls. Could you also put your email in the chat? And that would be helpful as a way for people to reach you to perhaps line up speaking engagements. And Chris also, like, I'm going to say this because Chris probably can't or won't, but Chris also does work for a nonprofit. As someone who came out of 7.5 years in nonprofits, definitely look into that group as well and see if, you know, if that's a place that we could support in other ways. And yeah, Parents for Peace is really cool. And they do some really groundbreaking work with curricula that Chris personally has worked on developing. And as far as he knows, it's not really happening in other parts of the country. Yeah, and feel free to put your gratitude in the chat. There's a lot of lovely thank yous pouring in. And I'm just going to close with an immense amount of gratitude that I feel and I felt throughout tonight. And thank you, Chris, for bringing such a great message and many inspirational words tonight to us.
Thank you, Chris. You're wonderful.
Thank you guys for having me. It was been an honor and a pleasure to you know, have you guys come and donate your time to listen to me ramble on. Look forward to meeting you guys out there in the field, man. Keep doing the great work that you guys are doing. It's much needed, and I'm glad to call all of you comrades.